Hello everyone, and thank you once again for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather on the second day of August 2020. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, heavy rains fell up over from the northern Snider Valley on up across the north and northwest Alaska range with McKinley River on the other side of the mountains, on the northwest side of the mountains, picking up 4.94 inches of precipitation with thunderstorms during the day today. And then off to the east-southeast of that location, Wonder Lake picked up 3.12 inches. And then further off to the east-southeast of Wonder Lake, Eielson Visitor Center had 1.78 inches. And also some pretty good rainfall got up into the upper Tanana Valley area, with Salsa picking up, for example, about 88 of an inch. Nenana had 2/3 of an inch, and over 7/10 fell at, it was Living Good. Not Living Good, Chattanooga. Anyway, south of the mountains in the Susitna Valley, Talkeetna had 24-hour rainfall amount of 1.01 inches, and then up toward Denali Park, 0.77. And Amber Lake about 2/3 of an inch, and then that drops off Portage Glacier a little over 1/2 an inch. Soldotna did pick up close to 1/2 an inch there, Homer 4/10, and then it really drops off as you head, especially up toward the Susitna Valley, with Eureka picking up 0.14 of an inch, about the same at Gunsight, Anchorage International Airport 0.14. Lighter amounts there into the western Copper River Basin, and that means fire danger is way down there. About the only spot I could find that edged into the high category there was over the Kobuk Valley, or southern Kobuk Valley, and that just barely got into the category. Otherwise, fire danger pretty well suppressed across the state. And from there, taking a look at the hazardous weather graphic, flood watches continue for the western Alaska Range area. There on the where I mentioned the heavy rain was falling, also in the greater Fairbanks area over toward over toward Tanana. And from there, we'll look at satellite imagery. You can see low pressure out over the southern Bering Sea, tracking slowly eastward with several bands of moisture, one pushing up to the Alaska Peninsula, extending back toward the Pribilofs, another one just southwest of St. Paul Island and kind of trailing into the eastern Aleutians, and yet a couple of more there kind of embedded in the clouds in the central Aleutian areas. A break in advance of that. You can see some clearing there over the Aleutian Range and Bristol Bay area, and the Yukon Delta mostly sunny, as well as Norton Sound into a good portion of the Seward Peninsula. Sunshine today all the way up into the northwest coast, Kotzebue, Deering, Buckland, and into the Noatak Valley. Also, skies began to clear out this afternoon with sunshine, mid-afternoon, actually late this morning, along the upper Yukon River there, and into toward Fairbanks and the eastern interior. That allowed temperatures to rise up to 78 degrees this afternoon at Chok-Yitzhak there in the upper Yukon Valley, and mid to upper 70s widespread across the clear area there. Gusty winds also occurring through the eastern Alaska Range. Delta Junction had gusts of 51 miles per hour, and Gulkana picking up to about 25 miles an hour out of the south this afternoon. Otherwise, rain fell along the North Gulf Coast. Cordova picking up about 1 1/3 inches of precipitation. Yakutat over an inch of rain, and Petersburg had a little over an inch of precipitation as well today. Juneau seeing winds gusting to 25 to 30 miles an hour to the east-southeast, with about 1/4 of an inch of rain falling in the 12-hour period ending at 3 p.m. Isolated thunderstorms were most concentrated. Most of the strikes were around the area there that had the heaviest rain, McKinley River. Otherwise, just isolated a couple of strikes, Eastern Brooks Range and the Eastern Alaska Range. Otherwise, there's that break there from Kodiak Island in across Bristol Bay to Kuskokwim Bay. and then more rain, light rain, fog, and drizzle pushing into the Alaska Peninsula. Winds kicking up about 30 miles an hour at Cold Bay. And for tonight, that low tracks eastward to the western Alaska Peninsula. Rain will spread to Kodiak Island into Bristol Bay. Precipitation will persist but diminish over the east central interior areas. Stay wet along the North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle, but precipitation amounts won't be that heavy. Outlook for tomorrow, periods of rain as that that low pressure area tracks east-southeast across the Alaska Peninsula. That'll be close enough to put rain into Kodiak, and trough will keep it wet along the North Gulf Coast into the Panhandle once again, with mostly cloudy, cool, and showery central and southern Alaska. And for Tuesday, front actually develops on that low as it tracks into the southern Gulf of Alaska, but far enough south that Prince William Sound will probably be dry with some partly sunny skies, showers for south central Alaska, but increasing wind and rain in store for the Panhandle, and stays wet and coolish there in the central interior with isolated thunderstorms. The new front pushes precipitation into the central Aleutians. Lows tonight, 30s north of the Brooks Range to the Arctic coast, otherwise 40s to mid-50s most everywhere else, upper 40s for the Aleutians. Highs tomorrow in the 60s, 65 to 70 call it over the west central interior, mid-60s south central Alaska, upper 50s to lower 60s for the Panhandle, 50s in the Bering Sea, upper 30s to mid-40s for the North Slope and the Arctic coast. Lows the following morning, mid-30s for the Arctic coast North Slope, otherwise 40s to lower 50s in the interior, all the way down to Kodiak Island, about the same, 50 to 55 for the Panhandle, upper 40s for the Aleutians and Bering Sea. And that'll be followed by highs 65 to 72 for the eastern interior down into the northern Kuskokwim Valley. Temperatures trying to push back towards 70 for south central Alaska and the Kenai Peninsula, upper 50s and to near 60.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on into flying weather, IFR, northern Kobuk, Koyukuk valleys, as well as the northern Yukon Flats area, across the Brooks Range to the Arctic coast. VFR, western interior mostly, and IFR, western Cook Inlet on up to the Windy Pass area, with marginal VFR eastward to the eastern Alaska Range, and IFR over the eastern interior. IFR into the central Copper River Basin, southward across Prince William Sound, all of the North Gulf Coast, from Kodiak Island eastward across all of the Panhandle. Alaska Peninsula IFR, Aleutians IFR on up across the Pribilofs to St. Lawrence Island and the western Seward Peninsula. For the afternoon, IFR still persists there from the Bering Strait southward across St. Lawrence Island, right along the Yukon Delta coast, western half of Nunivak Island, southern Bering Sea, and the Aleutians. Alaska Peninsula, mostly IFR with the marginal VFR mixed in. And then from Togiak Bay and Bristol Bay northward across the western interior to the Brooks Range, we've got VFR conditions. A little lower in the eastern areas, still IFR there from the northern Yukon Flats, Koyukuk Valley up to the central eastern Arctic coast. IFR holds over the Panhandle. IFR from the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, back down to Kodiak Island, Kamishak Bay. Marginal from Kachemak Bay up to, say, Kenai, and northern Cook Inlet looks like it'll become VFR. Southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians, IFR. And for Tuesday morning, IFR, southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians, with a band extending northward from the Alaska Peninsula right up across Nunivak Island, Yukon Delta coast, through the Bering Strait. Mostly IFR, Arctic coast, North Slope to the Brooks Range. South of the mountains, though, VFR. Say the mountains north of Fairbanks have some IFR to start, as well as the central western Alaska Range. And IFR, Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast, eastward across all the Panhandle. Stay socked in IFR, it looks like, for the southeast coast through Tuesday afternoon. Marginal VFR from, say, southern Prince William Sound eastward to Yakutat. Otherwise, not a bad day over the interior. Mostly VFR, some areas of marginal VFR lingering over the White Mountains, Central Alaska Range area. Bristol Bay, though, VFR, IFR, eastern, western Arctic coast, marginal on the west side, and IFR pretty well entrenched over the Bering Sea and Aleutians, and marginal VFR along the Kuskokwim Delta and Nunivak Island area. Anaktuvik tomorrow, Marsville VFR, but look for IFR flying conditions on the northern entrance. Adigan, same pattern, same forecast. Marsville VFR with IFR possible there for the northern approach. And Lake Clark and Merrill, Marsville VFR, rainy, marginal, and windy. I think it'll be IFR for the most part at times throughout the day. While Isabel starts out IFR and should become marginal in the afternoon, and Mintasta starts out marginal, becoming VFR probably by late morning. Tanita, marginal VFR. Portage looks pretty much IFR throughout the day. Chilkoot and White, definitely IFR. Excuse me, freezing levels at the surface just off the Arctic coast there for tomorrow morning. 4,000 to 6,000 to 8,000 feet there from the Russian Far East into the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island area. Otherwise, about 6,000 to 8,000 feet there, warmest in the western Aleutians, a little cooler to the east, and generally 8,000 feet or so over the interior, right on down to just off the southeast coast. And for icing, look for rime, possibly considerable moderate for Kodiak Island at some point in the day tomorrow, otherwise light to very isolated moderate over the remainder of southern Alaska and the Panhandle, with some mixed icing on up the eastern interior to the eastern Arctic coast. Jet stream, next system coming into the far western Aleutians late in the day with that 100-knot jet out there and the low just sitting along the east side of Kamchatka Peninsula. Otherwise, upper level low, southern Cook Inlet, and 50-knot winds into the southern Panhandle. So the main jet staying south of the area. 9,000 feet, 40-knot northerlies there for the area from Nikolsky to Atka. Otherwise, pretty light winds elsewhere around the state. 35-knot southeast winds, Kodiak Island, and that translates to some light to isolated moderate chop for Kodiak and the Aleutian Range, as well as Lynn Canal and the eastern and central Aleutians, and turbulence poised to move into the far western Aleutians.
When I first started working here in the early 90s, this is where the glacier was. I mean, where we're walking right now would have been a pile of gravel that had been pushed up by the glacier, and then we would have had 100 to 200 foot high cliffs of ice right here. And as you can see, that's changed quite a bit. And if you look at that in 2 dimensions, you can sort of see the terminus used to be here, now it's back there. That gives you one measure. What that kind of 2-dimensional look doesn't show is how much mass has been lost, that the glacier has just sort of deflated. These 200-foot cliffs of ice have disappeared and pulled back to this gentle sloping glacier you see now.
When I was working in Kenai Fjords National Park, I used the topographic maps to navigate where I was, and I realized that the mapping of the glaciers was really off. The glaciers had receded a lot. There were new rivers and lakes that were establishing where the ice used to be or should have been according to the maps. And so then I did a study on this and found out that we had a 5% loss of glacier ice mass in the Kenai Fjords area between 1950 and 1985. Big change.
You know, one of the most compelling things we do, though, to document glacier change is simply take photographs. We've had repeat photography projects here at the park. They may not give you the most accurate data in terms of how much mass or real specific measurements, but what they do give you is a visual representation that can't be argued with. I mean, it really requires no interpretation.
Understanding what's happening, understanding these processes, and possibly being able to predict what's going to happen in the future is the best that we can do, and that requires science and research.
There's considerable research on climate change in Alaska. The most significant, I would say right now, is the Natural Resources Inventory and Monitoring Program, which is looking at change across a wide variety of vital signs or indicators.
Kenai Fjords National Park is actually a pretty good representation of what's going on globally with regards to glacier ice retreat. There have been studies showing that mountain glaciers are retreating all over the planet. There are probably well over 90% of the glaciers are in retreat status. There are a few that are advancing and some are holding their terminus point. But at Kenai Fjords, the tidewater glaciers are retreating more dramatically, but even the land-based glaciers in the terminus positions are retreating. It's pretty common for all the mountain glaciers. The big mountain glaciers in Wrangell St. Elias National Park, they're mostly in retreat too. We're really entering an interesting phase where what we call the cryosphere, the ice on the planet, is melting.
You know, in the more immediate past, it's clear that since the Pleistocene, glaciers have been retreating. So the idea that glaciers retreat is no revelation. They've been retreating from across North America for the last 10,000 years. What appears to have changed and what has people's attention is the rate at which they're retreating. In the case of Exit Glacier, we have scientists who've been looking at it. We have evidence that the glaciers left behind, or we can track that retreat for about the last 200 years. And we can say with confidence that in the last decade, that rate has increased.
Terminus mapping is a great way to map a small portion of the ice field. We come out twice a year and we use a GPS to walk the edge of the terminus and map the farthest extent of Exit Glacier. And that allows us to see what type of changes are occurring over the winter accumulation period and the summer ablation period. With that data, that can help us as we witness these changes within the ice field, we can hopefully be able to correlate that with the weather data that we have.
When you look at an ice field that's 750 square miles, when you look at a glacier that towers hundreds of feet high, you get a sense of permanence. You think these things are massive, they're somehow a permanent sort of feature, and yet in a very short period of time, in a matter of a couple of decades, we've seen dramatic change in those things.
At Exit Glacier, we have a time-lapse camera set up on the glacier that allows us to take a couple photos every single day, and then to put that sequence of photos into a video where we can see changes of the glacier and the vegetation phenology throughout an entire year.
Virtually all the glaciers in Alaska are receding. Some glaciers are moving forward. That's not an indication that they're actually growing in size. It's just the rate at which they're slipping down the mountain.
In some cases, some of these glaciers are receding back up onto land, and so they're producing less ice. When you change the glacier systems, you're changing habitat for marine mammals and other wildlife. And the populations of harbor seals have dropped dramatically in the fjords. In 1980, shortly after the establishment of the park, in Island Bay, we had maybe 1,500 harbor seals. Nowadays, it's a few hundred.
In Arctic environments, much of the sunlight that reaches the Earth bounces back because it hits snow and reflects off into space, or ice on the ocean and reflects off into space. That's the albedo effect. When the snow thaws and instead you have rock or vegetation, or when the ice thaws and you have transparent ocean, the sunlight will convert to other wavelengths. It'll convert essentially to warmth. That does not bounce back into the atmosphere as much. So consequently, you get a warming of the ocean, you get a warming of the ground, you get a thawing of frozen soils or permafrost, you get a more rapid thawing of sea ice. So once the ice and once the snow is off of the surface, the rate of warming increases considerably.
If you're driving out to Exit Glacier, you'll actually start to see signs along the side of the road that have dates on them. Visitors sometimes are confused. They think they're elevations or something until they get up to the glacier and realize, oh, those were all date signs along the road that were telling me when the glacier was there. Another thing that's been happening in the Exit Glacier area in recent years is this flooding that comes at a time we're not used to. We're used to having maybe some flooding in the fall when we have a lot of heavy rain. This has suddenly been some flooding that's coming in the middle of the summer, usually not associated with precipitation events. It's associated with warmer weather and melting. When you walk down one of our trails that leads to Exit Glacier, there are a number of ways to get out there, but what used to be the main route is is no longer really the main route because of the way the glacier has changed. So this main route to the glacier used to provide dramatic views of the glacier as you walk towards it. In fact, there was a large kiosk built at the end of this trail for people to stop and rest and enjoy the view of the glacier. Now, if they stop and rest at this kiosk, people think, why did the park put a kiosk here? Because it looks out at some shrubs. And there's no glacier within view anymore.
The way we solve big problems like this is not all at once. There's a thing called the Sokolov's wedges, and you just take a little bite of the pie, one sliver at a time. So we try to do incremental changes.
When we talk to people about our concerns about climate change, about the changes that are happening to the glacier, we also want to leave them with some idea of what we're doing to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. For example, here at the park, as we retire vehicles out of our fleet, we try to replace them with electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. We've done things like at the Exit Glacier Nature Center, helping to sort of experiment and install a cutting-edge fuel cell as opposed to running some traditional power source out there that relies on some sort of more greenhouse-producing gas.
My main hope for the future is that people get the message that the planet is changing fairly rapidly in places, particularly places like Kenai Fjords National Park, and that it is, we think, there's good evidence it's a result of atmospheric changes, which are measured in terms of human inputs into the atmosphere.
The rapid rate at which these glaciers are changing now offers us the opportunity to talk about this place as a way of looking into the future. In a lot of parts of the country, climate change issues are a little more subtle. And we can point here and say, look how fast this is changing. This is what the future holds for perhaps a lot of us and a lot of the planet as climate continues to change.
I'm optimistic that people and nature will adapt to change, but my expectation is that change will occur. Time will tell.
Welcome back. Sea ice analysis about the same as yesterday, except it looks like the heavier ice there pushing in toward the barrier islands. They're just around the Kaktovik area there. Otherwise, not a lot of change. You can see the sea ice free area appears to be farther to the east along the coastline on the eastern Beaufort coast. And from there, we'll go to the coastal water forecast for the Panhandle. Southwest 15 on the south coast, seas 5 feet. South 10 to 15 on the north coast. Southerly winds 15 knots for the inside waters, with the exception of Lynn Canal, be south 15. But look for gale force gusts out of the south to 35 knots for areas like Eldred Rock. And then on Monday, small craft advisories for Lynn Canal, south winds 25 knots, 5-foot seas, south 15 with 3-foot seas for Stevens Passage, and Clarence Strait south at 20 knots, south-southwest 20 knots on the south coast, and south to southeast at 20 knots on the north coast. Prince William Sound, southeast wind 15 knots, seas 3 feet for Monday, southeast 15 with 4-foot seas for the eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast 15 knots for the Barren Islands as well, and the western North Gulf Coast looking at east winds at 15 knots. Kamishak Bay, east winds 20 knots. Cook Inlet, winds will be out of the southeast, but only at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. And for Tuesday, we've got northeast winds 15 knots for northern Cook Inlet, southern Cook Inlet, north at 20, Kamishak Bay, north 15. But significantly windier for the North Gulf Coast and Barren Islands. Northeast winds 30 knots there from southwestern Prince William Sound all the way down across the Barren Islands with seas at 8 to 9 feet. East winds 30 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast with 8-foot seas. And for Kodiak Island on the east side there, Fogneck and Kodiak Island looking at southeast winds 20 knots. Small craft advisory Shelikof Strait northeast at 25. And for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, winds will be northeast at 15 knots, turning east at 15 for Bristol Bay, and south side of the peninsula, southwest 15. For Tuesday, north to northwest, 10 to 15 knots for the Alaska Peninsula, northwest at 10, so light winds for Bristol Bay with 2-foot seas. Small craft advisories, though, from Castle Cape to Sitkinak, winds will be north 25 knots, and a little bit stronger there for the east side of Kodiak Island, north at 30 knots with 8-foot seas. And for the Fox Islands, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots for Monday, 6 to 11-foot seas. Small craft advisories for the central Aleutians, Adak and Atka, including Amchitka, northwest winds at 25 knots with 8 to 11-foot seas. And then Kiska to Shemya, south at 20. Those will pick up to southwest 20 knots from Shemya to Kiska on Tuesday, and for Amchitka Island, south at 30. Central Aleutians, Adak and Atka, south to southwest 25 to 30 knots, seas up to 7 feet. And Unalaska Island, westerlies 15 to 20 knots. Zunmac Island, southwest at 20. For the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island and St. Matthew Island, as well as the Pribilofs, all looking at 20-knot winds tomorrow from the north, seas running 6 to 7 feet. Kuskokwim Delta coast, northeast at 15, and Norton Sound, light winds out of the north. That'll continue into Tuesday as well for Norton Sound, north winds at about 10 knots. 3-foot seas, north 20 for St. Lawrence Island, south at 10 for St. George, St. Paul, Walrus Island, St. Matthew Island, with 3 to 4-foot seas, northwest 15 along the southwest coast. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, northeast winds 15 knots, seas 3 feet. Central and west side, northeast at 10. And then 20-knot winds, Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson. Small craft advisories, Cape Thompson to Wales, as north winds will blow 25 knots with seas at 7 feet. Those will fall back to 15 knots from the northwest on Tuesday. West-southwest, pretty light for the western Arctic coast. Central and east coast, or part of the east coast, they're looking light and variable to north at 10, Kaktovik demarcation point. For tonight, rain persists there in the west central or the east central interior, but dries out Copper River Basin into the upper Tanana Valley 40 Mile country, and showers all the way down toward Iliamna Lake. Periods of light rain for the North Gulf Coast. System spreads rain into the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay. It stays wet in the Panhandle through Monday. Rain pushes back into Kodiak as that low tracks across the Alaska Peninsula. Periods of rain for the North Gulf Coast, and showers and cool over the central and southern interior. Next system pushes rain and increase in the wind, small craft advisories into the central Aleutians Tuesday afternoon. And also rain begins to increase with wind on the Panhandle in the afternoon. Otherwise cool and showery once again across southern Alaska.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.